The kids loved it, and this was seniors who don't want to do anything because they're ready to graduate. If we can find anything that talks about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they are interested. I'm not a normal English teacher. We get to talk about vagina. Kids always like to talk about eggplants. The song is about being a virgin. And then they're all like, ugh, how can I say this nicely? I hate Shakespeare. Hey, it's Maggie, and today we're going to be doing a poetry countdown. I mostly teach English 2, which is 10th graders. I also teach seniors, 12th graders, and poetry is something that I know at least my students seem to abhor. They just hate it. So we do the best job that we can to make them excited about it, and so I'm going to show you some of the poems I used to get them excited today. This is a collab video with a bunch of other creators and teachers from YouTube. So if you will check the description down below, you can see some links to their videos too. So make sure you check them out when you're finished with mine. So we're going to start with number 5. So number 5 is actually what I consider to be the easiest poem that I use to teach my students about poetry. And that's because if we start with a difficult one, at least for me, I feel like the students have already checked out. So I like to start with an easy poem so they feel like they get it, and then we will then do some harder poems. So if you see me looking weird at my screen and stuff, it's because my poems are up here. My printer at home is not working, so I have to look at them on my screen. Sorry. So the first poem I'm going to talk about is, like I said, the easiest one, and it is called Sick by Shel Silverstein. And I have a love for Shel Silverstein. I have loved his work since elementary school, as a lot of folks do. I have a lot of his works memorized, and I just love how goofy and fun his poetry is. And it really does, for the most part, follow a normal rhyming scheme where just it has that end rhyme at the end. And so it's an easy way, I think, to teach the kids the concepts about poetry, and then we can get into more difficult ones. And why not start with something funny? This poem is about a little girl that doesn't want to go to school, and so she makes up all these illnesses and diseases and all kinds of ailments that she has to get out of going to school. And then at the end, she finds out it's Saturday, and she's miraculously well. I think this one's fun for the kids too, because they definitely relate to this, and we talk about that idea of when you're a kid, you make up things to get out of stuff. Also just love the idea of hearing the actual poet saying their own works. So for the poem Sick, there is a recording of Shel Silverstein reading it, and he reads it with such oomph and such wit, and he's so funny, and he makes sound effects and all these kind of things. And so even though we read it together as a class, we also listen to him reading it, and I think it just helps so much to be able to hear the author's voice or the poet's voice as how they would read their own works. So that's number 5, which is Sick by Shel Silverstein. Also, pretty much anything with Shel Silverstein is amazing, but we're sticking to 5 poems. So the next one is number 4. And number 4 is Sonnet 130, which is My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, which is obviously William Shakespeare. So I'm not a normal English teacher. Let me just say that first. How can I say this nicely? I hate Shakespeare. There. I said it. And I feel like my kids really hate Shakespeare, and it's just because of the language. It's so hard for them to grasp, and they don't understand what's the point and all this kind of thing. Now, I will say I love Shakespeare's ideas and stories, and his works and things are amazing. But, you know, I like reading that no fear version that's translated. Sorry, I just do. So, for this poem, I feel like it's a good one that we use to introduce the language Shakespeare uses. It's a good way to introduce, obviously, sonnet form. And for this one, it's funny. And the kids actually get it and they think it's funny once we go through and explain it and stuff. So I really like this one. So this one is about how, you know, like when poets and authors and people in movies and stuff talk about the way the person they love looks or acts, and it's always just these huge raving metaphors, and you know, like we really don't look like that. So he just is realistic. He's like, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. And so the kids in the beginning think he means like that she's ugly, but then we realize he doesn't mean she's ugly. He just means she's normal, and she's like pretty for being normal, but I mean, he's not going to describe her in these crazy metaphors and things. So that's the reason that I like this one. It's accessible, easy Shakespeare to me, and as I said, a great way to introduce sonnets and a great way to introduce the students to Shakespeare's language in like an accessible way in small chunks. So that is number 4, Sonnet 130. My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun by old Bill Shakespeare. Okay, sorry. Let's go to number 3. And I have to tell you, my number 3 is actually 2 poems. But I'm sorry, I can't talk about these poems without talking about the 2 of them. So, the 2 poems are To His Coy Mistress, which is Andrew Marvell, and The Virgins to Make Much of Time, which is by Robert Herrick. And they're both about the same subject matter. So for me, I think they are really good to be done in unison, together, as a pair. So both of the poems are about virginity and youth. They're both kind of carpe diem, seize the day poems. And I teach these to my seniors. But I'm gonna go on my little rant here. If you want your kids to pay attention, especially if they're high school age, this is obviously not appropriate for middle school or elementary school, but with me teaching seniors, if we can find anything that talks about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they are interested. And I mean, to be quite honest, I'm interested too. It's a lot more exciting. So both of these poems are about virginity and sex and all that kind of stuff and love. And once we get to sit down and talk about these, the kids are so into these. Now I will tell you, if you start out by giving kind of a background on the author and looking at the language and stuff, like they're going to zone out on you. You kind of have to be like, this song is about being a virgin. And then they're all like, ugh, and they get excited and they want to read it. So just some funny tidbits from my class, because you know I have to share funny stories. So in To His Coy Mistress, there's a line called My Vegetable Love Should Grow. And the kids always like to talk about eggplants. So, you know, that's a fun conversation to go with it. They're like, he's talking about eggplants. Okay, sure. So in To His Coy Mistress, they have the line about that the worms are going to take your virginity. And the kids are like, ew, that's so gross. And so that's really funny. And we like to talk about that. Just a fun activity to do with these 2 poems. We like to compare and contrast them because they're both talking about the same subject matter. But also, I have my students write the mistress's reply. So in this one, he's like, we need to do it now. We need to do it while we're young and able and hot and passionate and all these kind of things. And he's begging her, you know, and trying to plead with her. So I have the kids write her reply. I said, so what does she say back? Does she say yes? Does she say no? Does she say maybe? Does she say, we'll get around to it? Or maybe, but not with you? And I'm going to tell you what. I thought the kids would struggle. I said, you know, let's do the same rhyme scheme and pattern as this poem. The kids loved it. And this was seniors who don't want to do anything because they're ready to graduate. And they did such a great job with it, and they were hilarious. So some of them wrote that she was like, no, get away from me, you're disgusting. Some of them, they were like, yes, let's do it. And they were hilarious. And they did a really good job. And I just said, you know, you have to have like 3 metaphors and the same rhyme scheme and all this. They were so good, and they were so funny. So if you want to have a fun activity to do with these, doing the Mistress's reply is good. There's also a published Mistress's reply that we read sometimes too to kind of get them started. So I guess I'm on number 3. So my number 3 poems are, because there's 2, To His Coy Mistress, which is Andrew Marvell, and To the Virgins to Make Much of Time, which is Robert Herrick. So now we're on to number 2. And number 2 is very, very famous, Maya Angelou. Do you say Maya Angelou or Maya Angelou? Let me know in the comments, because like it really bothers me. I feel like I'm saying it wrong every time I say it, but I've heard it said both ways. Tidbit, I went to Appalachian State and she died not too soon after and spoke, and she was amazing. So I love reading her stuff. Also, it's nice to read something from someone who is not an old white man, so we like hearing a different perspective. So the poem for number 2 is Maya Angelou, and it is a phenomenal woman, and it is an amazing poem. I think it's really important for us to talk about with the kids, because they do not have self-confidence in themselves, and they are not very proud of themselves a lot of times. So it's kind of good to say, like, it's okay for you to be proud of yourself. It's okay for you to be like, yeah, I look good, you know, and all these kind of things. I really like showing them this example, because even though it rhymes, it doesn't necessarily show that same rhyme scheme pattern that's exactly like everybody else's. It's got little short lines and then long lines. It's got that varying pattern. Got some repetition, got a lot of imagery. And again, as we said, if you've got some sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they love to hear about it. And with them having the line that says, there's a diamond at the meeting of my thighs, we get to talk about vagina. And I'm sorry I said it that way, but like the kids freak out when we read that part. And she says, like, they can't touch my inner mystery. So they're like, what is that? And like all these kind of things. And the kids really don't know what to do with this information. So we talk about it. And I don't know, I really like to talk about being proud of being a woman in class, and that it's okay for you to also be proud that you're a man. I don't know, is that wrong of me? But I think it's good for them to learn to be proud of who they are and not be ashamed of it. So we love reading Phenomenal Woman. Again, there's a recording of her reading it on YouTube, and she reads it and she does like a couple parts. She laughs in a couple parts. She chops some pieces out. And so we talk about how awesome it is to hear her say it and why we think she reads it that way. So that's always fun. Also, we like Still I Rise in my classroom. Either of those are really great. I just picked Phenomenal Woman because that's one I did last year that the kids really liked, and I really liked too. So number 2, Maya Angelou, Phenomenal Woman. So now we're at number 1. Now, I told you sex, drugs, rock and roll. So my number 1 is probably the hardest poem that I teach my kids, and that's because it doesn't rhyme. So then my number 1 pick is Be Drunk, which is by Charles Baudelaire. Now, it's called Be Drunk. And when I pass this out in the room, everybody gets excited. They're like, yeah, we're going to read about getting drunk, getting turned, getting lit. Sorry, embarrassing moment. But they freak out over it. And then once we read the poem, they're like, dang, why are you having us read this? Like, we can't even drink it. It's illegal. Da, 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 da. And we talk about it, and then they realize the poem has nothing to do with drinking necessarily. It's another Carpe Diem poem. It's about the hardships of life. It's talking about, like, if you're going to do something, you need to do it to the fullest. You need to be extra. And then they're like, we thought it was about getting drunk. And I'm like, haha, I tricked you. Don't fall for it again. I love tricking them, by the way. I like getting them excited about something and then putting the skirt on them and, like, turning the other way. They get so mad. Do y'all like tricking your students? Not like in a mean way. It's just funny to get them excited about something and then they realize, like, oh, I'm learning. Oh no. But anyways, like I said, like, the poem doesn't rhyme. It's kind of in, like, paragraph form, which they're like, this is not a poem, and we have to talk about that. So yeah, I mean, and I use this one with my 10th graders, and they enjoy it, and we get to have some really good discussions. And a lot of times, I don't expect them to be able to pick up on the meaning of it, but they can do it by themselves. Even my lower classes are able to pick up on the meaning behind this poem if we really kind of go over it and talk through it as a class. So don't underestimate your kids. I think if you start with a really easy poem and kind of work them up to it, like we start with Sick, which is Shel Silverstein, a kid's poem. We move to, like, Phenomenal Woman, and then we move to this one. And just doing those three, they do pretty good. So don't underestimate your students. So that was my 5 picks. Obviously, I kind of picked some old fuddy-duddy poems, but I think if you make them fun and accessible for your kids and you're doing them as a class, then yeah, they can work. I mean, don't rule out the old fuddy-duddies if there's parts of them and things that you like. You know, using those 2 poems about virginity and stuff go great when we talk about Canterbury Tales as 12th graders. So you just have to find things that work together and work for you and your students. We also love to look at songs. I didn't include any in here, but we look at all kinds of songs that are current and now and talk about them, and they're a great way to make the kids understand these different types of rhyme and metaphor and symbolism, because the songs are full of it, and they obviously love their music, and I love my music too, so that's another way that you can do it, even though I didn't include them here. I have also included a print up that you can download down below. I'm going to put it as a Google form, and it's got all the poems listed, so you don't even have to go look them up. You can actually just pull up the list and read them and look at them. So I make them fit on one sheet because if I give them as a handout to the kids, I want it to take up either only one sheet of paper or, like, less than that. So that's how they're printed up on the sheet and why they may kind of look strange. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more awesome content that we have coming out. This was a collab video, so make sure you go down in the description and click on some of the other cool people that contributed to this discussion. We've got middle school teachers, some teachers from other places in the world besides just the United States, so that's awesome. And people from middle school and high school that are going to be contributing to this. And I want to thank EJ, who is from Kafuple Land, for kind of making this collab and for inviting me, little old me, to collab with some of these big names. It's very exciting. And that's it, I think. In a few days, I'm going to be posting a giveaway, but the giveaway information and everything is going to be on my Instagram. I have linked the Instagram account down below. It's just booked for the week the same way it is here. So if you want to enter that giveaway and you're from the United States and a teacher, then make sure that you follow my Instagram account so that you will be eligible. Because pretty much the rules are going to be, you're from the US, you're a teacher, you are subscribed to me on YouTube, and you follow me on Instagram, and that's kind of going to be it. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.